I go on night walks where my head gets loud, no music and no phone, just walking until my thoughts settle. There's a forest trail near my house that stays open after dark. It's not remote, it's like close enough to the town that you still hear distant traffic, but it's far enough to feel alone. One night last fall, I went out around 11 p.m. The moon was bright enough that I didn't need a flashlight. About 10 minutes in, I heard footsteps behind me. I assumed someone else was walking the trail, and I didn't turn around. The steps stayed at the same distance. When I stopped walking, the steps behind me also stopped. That's when I turned around. But the trail behind me was empty. I just stood there for a few seconds, just listening, and I heard nothing. I told myself sound travels weirdly in the woods, and I just kept going. A few minutes later, I heard breathing. It was so close, I felt like someone was right behind me. But I turned again, and still nothing. My heart started racing. I told myself to calm down. I picked up my pace, and I headed back toward the trailhead. That's when I heard someone behind me. Don't rush. I spun around. This time I saw him. He just stood over the trail, partially hidden behind a tree. And he wasn't stepping out, he wasn't approaching me, he was just watching. And I didn't say anything, I couldn't say anything. I just backed away slowly and never turning my back on him. He didn't follow me, he just stayed there, eyes tracking me until I reached the bend in the trail. When I got back to the parking lot, my car was the only one there. I've never been big on New Year's parties. Too loud, too crowded, too many people pretending they're happy just because the calendar says they should be. So on December 31st, 2021, I stayed home alone in my apartment. Midnight came and went with distant fireworks and muffled cheers echoing between buildings. I was sitting on my couch when I heard a sound outside my window. It was like metal scraping. And I live on the fourth floor, so at first I thought it was fireworks or maybe just someone on the street below. But then it came again, and then slower this time. I pulled the curtain back, just enough to look out. There was a man standing on my fire escape. And he was not climbing, he was not moving, he was just standing there, looking at me. One hand gripping the railing, staring directly at my window. And of course I froze, my brain just couldn't comprehend what was happening. But then suddenly he knocked once, just a light casual knock. Like he was just knocking on a door, like it was the most casual thing, like it was the most normal thing ever. I didn't move. Then my phone buzzed. Midnight alerts, Happy New Year messages. The glow from the screen lit up my living room, and I saw his reflection in the glass shift slightly, like he noticed the light. He leaned closer and mouthed something I couldn't hear. I backed away and locked myself in the bathroom, phone in hand, listening to him. I heard the fire escape creak, then footsteps moving along the metal platform. He tried another window, and then another. I called the police and whispered what was happening. They told me to stay put. When officers arrived, they found him 2 floors down, sitting on another fire escape, drinking from a bottle. He said he claimed he got confused and thought it was his friend's building. I've been camping alone for most of my adult life. Not because I don't like people, but because being alone in the woods feels honest. No distractions, no noise, just you and whatever you're capable of handling. Winter camping especially weeds people out. No casual hikers, no families, no drunk campers staying up all night. If you run into someone out here in December, it's usually because they're meant to be here. That's what made this experience so unsettling. It happened in early December, a few years back in the National Forest in Colorado. The ranger station was closed for the season, but dispersed camping was still allowed. I checked weather reports, logged my route, and told 2 people exactly where I'd be, standard safety stuff. I parked at a snowed-in trailhead just before sunset and hiked about 2 miles in. The snow was steep, but the trail was still visible in places. I picked a spot near a frozen creek, far enough from the trail to be private, but close enough that I could find my way back in the dark if I needed to. By the time I finished setting up my tent, the forest had gone completely quiet. No wind, no birds, no distant highway noise, just that heavy, padded silence you only get after a fresh snowfall. I cooked dinner, melted snow, and crawled into my sleeping bag around 9 p.m. The temperature dropped fast. I remember checking my watch once more before turning my headlamp off. I don't know what woke me up at first. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a feeling. The sense you get when something changes suddenly, even if you can't explain how. Then I heard it. It sounded like footsteps, and not loud footsteps, and not careless, just slow and deliberate, like they were trying not to be heard. I lay completely still inside my sleeping bag, barely breathing. The steps moved closer, then stopped just a few feet from my tent. I told myself it was an animal, an elk maybe, or a deer. Whatever it was, walked around me once. Then the tent wall pressed inward, not hard, just enough to push the fabric against my shoulder. I shouted, "Hey, who's there?" My voice sounded thin in the cold air, and there was no answer. The pressure disappeared, and the footsteps retreated a few steps. I stayed frozen, listening so hard my ears rang. After maybe 30 seconds, I heard him again, moving away this time, slowly, toward the creek. I waited a long time before doing anything. Finally, I reached for my headlamp and unzipped the tent, just enough to look out. The beam cut through the darkness, lighting up trees, snowbanks, and a frozen creek. But nothing moved. And when I looked down, my stomach dropped. There were footprints in the snow around my tent, and the worst thing of all, not boots, but bare feet prints. They were uneven, like the person was favoring one foot, pressed deep into the snow, as if whoever made them wasn't feeling the cold the way a normal person would. I followed the trail with my light. The footprints led away from my camp and toward the creek, then stopped abruptly at the edge of the ice. No return cracks, no indication they turned around. Just gone. I didn't sleep after that. I sat with my back against the tree until the sky began to lighten. As soon as it was light, enough to see clearly, I packed up. I didn't bother at breakfast. I didn't clean the site. I just wanted out. When I reached the trailhead, my truck was exactly where I left it. But something was off. Frost covered every window thick and white, except the driver's side windshield. Then, there, wiped clean in the shape of a hand, was a clear print. No glove marks, just skin. In late November 2018, me and two friends broke into an abandoned factory. We'd explored places like this before, schools, warehouses, whatever. This one was different, because it still had power. Dim emergency lights glowed in the hallways. Somewhere inside, a machine was still running. We moved through offices, production floors, break rooms, frozen in time. Then we found a control room, and in the center was a digital clock mounted above a panel of switches, and it was counting down. Hours, minutes, seconds. We joked that it was probably some automated shutdown timer that never got turned off. But the closer it got to zero, the more uneasy I felt. At 10 minutes remaining, we heard footsteps in the factory. We shut our lights off and hid behind machinery. A man walked through the control room, and he wasn't security, he had no uniform, it was just jeans and a jacket. He stopped in front of the clock and watched it tick down. At 1 minute, he turned his head and looked straight at where we were hiding. He didn't say anything, he just smiled at us. When the clock hit zero, every light in the building shut off at once. Total darkness. We ran. We didn't stop until we were back in the car. When we looked back at the factory, all the lights were on again, like nothing happened. I've always liked camping near the ocean in the off-season. No crowds, no kids, no loud music, just wind, waves, and an empty shoreline. This happened in late September, after tourist season had ended. I drove out to a stretch of beach in Northern California, where camping is allowed if you hike far enough down the coast. I parked near the beach and walked about a mile along the sand before setting up my tent near the dunes. There were no other tents, no fires, and no lights anywhere down the beach. The first night was really calm. I fell asleep to the sound of waves and woke up a few times to the wind moving my tent. But nothing felt wrong until around 3 a.m. I woke up because the waves sounded different. They were not louder, it just sounded like something was blocking the sound. I sat up and listened. That's when I noticed another sound layered underneath the ocean. Slow footsteps on wet sand. I assumed it was someone walking down the beach, maybe another camper passing through. I just stayed still, waiting for the steps to move past my tent. But they didn't, they just stopped outside. And I could see the shadow of someone standing between my tent and the moonlight. Then I heard a zipper, and not my tent, but a jacket. The person took a step closer, close enough that the fabric of my tent shifted slightly from the air movement. I finally spoke. Can I help you? No answer. The footsteps retreated slowly, moving back toward the water. I waited. I counted seconds before unzipping my tent and shining my flashlight, but there was no one there. But in the morning, when the tide went out, I saw footprints circling my campsite, overlapping like the person had walked around my tent multiple times before stopping. They led back toward the ocean and disappeared. This happened when I was 22. I worked late shifts at a restaurant and walked home most nights because I lived close enough. That night, I got off just after midnight. The streets were quiet, but not empty. A couple of cars passing by and distant music somewhere. I noticed the man when I crossed the first intersection. He wasn't close, maybe half a block behind me. He had a hoodie on, his hands in his pockets, and he was just walking at the same pace. I didn't think much of it at first. People walk at night, I just didn't want to be paranoid. After 4 blocks, he was still there. Every time I slowed, he slowed. I told myself he probably lived nearby and that I was overthinking it. But then I turned down my street. I realized too late how bad that was. I sped up and so did he. I could hear his shoes clearly now. He took heavy steps. It was like he wasn't worried about being subtle anymore. I stopped walking and turned around. What do you want? I asked. He stopped walking and smiled slightly and said, You noticed? That was all. I didn't respond, I just walked again, faster this time and straight toward my building. My keys were already in my hand, digging into my palm. He followed me right up to the front door. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and slammed it shut. I just stood there, shaking and listening. Through the glass, I watched him stand on the sidewalk for a few seconds, staring at the door. Then he leaned forward and looked directly into the lobby. He tapped the glass once with his knuckle, and then he walked away.